Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Allard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder, this is for both of you to comment on, if you would just describe the extent of the evidence that Saddam's regime destroyed materials and documents and equipment, and whether your findings were accurately reflected in Saddam's 2002 report to the UN Security Council.
Sir, our task wasn't to compare what we found with the UN document, what was provided to the UN. Likewise, it wasn't to compare what we found with pre-war intelligence assessments. We had enough trouble just trying to determine what it was that was on the ground. However, in the process of doing that, it was quite clear that we were finding things which were certainly at variance with the UN resolutions. But we didn't line up what we found with what Iraq was declaring.
But you did see enough evidence there that raised suspicions about the accuracy of the 2002 report to the UN Security Council?
Well, there certainly were errors in that report.
Errors did exist?
Errors did exist, yes.
Similarly, did you uncover more evidence that the regime engaged in additional destruction of weapons of mass destruction evidence after hostilities began in 2003?
I think, David Kay and I both have commented on that there was a lot of destruction at sites, the intentional destruction of documentation, materials, and it's difficult to, determine exactly what was removed and destroyed, but there clearly was in certain areas to destroy materials that would be helpful in our investigation now.
Would you care to speculate on the motivation for the destruction of those?
Well, Iraq had, throughout its existence, a denial and deception activity, multiplicity of reasons, but one of which was to conceal whatever they had with respect to WMD from UN inspectors, but also to protect the regime leadership in many ways. So, it could have been related to many different things. There was also records unrelated to WMD, but perhaps related to, atrocities that they wanted to cover up.
So you do think in your mind that there was some WMD programs that they were trying to destroy evidence of?
No, I haven't said that, sir. I've said there was active steps taken to destroy things and materials which could be helpful to our investigation. I don't know what it was that they were destroying evidence of, though. I can't, make that next step.
I see. Mr. Duelfer, your predecessor and certainly other recent commissions and government reviews have all concluded that we had poor human intelligence in Iraq to uncover and corroborate weapons of mass destruction, facts and assertions. In your opinion, how did we get into that poor state?
Okay. Well, it's not my responsibility. Nevertheless, I do have opinions. Again, because we did not have relations with Iraq, we didn't have access for a long period of time, and that's sort of one factor. Another factor is
it was a closed society.
It was
so
a very
close. Difficult to get people in there on the field to verify.
That is true, and while UNSCOM was operating in Iraq, I take some pride in this. We had a great deal of information about Iraq that we made public. And our reports to the Security Council, which occurred, 4 times a year, were quite detailed. And I think, perhaps people assumed that was a pretty good source of information.
Yeah,
but again, these are just my opinions, and I'm not the best positioned person to comment on that question.
On its face, we have a closed society. They agree to have inspectors come into the country in Iraq. Then all of a sudden you kick them out. That does raise suspicions about what's going on in the country as far as weapons of mass destruction, doesn't it?
Well, certainly in December 1998, when Desert Fox took place, there was 4 days of bombing. UNSCOM left Iraq. There was an enormous division in the Security Council at that time because there was a difference of opinion about whether that that bombing should have taken place. There was the Iraqis, certainly the Iraqis I spoke with, were actually quite satisfied and pleased. One individual I spoke with, I remember, said, well, gee, if we knew that that was all you were going to do, meaning the 4 days of bombing, we would have ended this, earlier. But from December 1998 until December 1999, the Security Council was in complete disagreement over what to do with Iraq. There was not a consensus. It took them a full year to arrive at a new resolution. During that period of time, Iraq was free, obviously, to do what it wants, and it was clear that there was not a consensus on how to deal with Iraq, and they would draw their own conclusions from that.
I understand from your remarks the degree of uncertainty regarding involvement of the neighboring countries in Iraq's potential transportation of weapons of mass destruction or facilities. For example, we saw reports that Iraqi intelligence services would replace border security guards while cargo caravans crossed various border stations. Would you want to elaborate on those assertions and facts?
Well, our investigation has looked a lot at what took place at some of the border points and surrounding the border crossing points. And this is described in some detail in our report. Certainly there was a lot of activity related to the transfer of prohibited conventional munitions. The Mukhabarat, the Iraqi intelligence service, was involved in that. They had people at these border points. There was a lot of traffic back and forth. There were reports about WMD-related materials crossing the border, but I still feel that we have not yet run down all the leads that we can on that. I'm not sure we'll ever be able to definitively answer that question, but I still think there are some avenues of exploration which we can pursue. Are some of those papers in the volumes of information you just acquired? Do you believe that they could be there? Well, the customs documents are not replicated in the book, but the discussion about some of the lines of inquiry we have had are included in that, including the role of the Mukhabarat, the Iraqi intelligence service. I see my time's expired, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Allard.